Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome back to the TechFlow Futures Theatre. I'm Rob Ambrose. I've been moderating and chairing today. So if you've been along to a few of the different sessions we've had on emerging technologies, everything from the cloud, AI and machine learning, to blockchain, to architecting content workflow solutions for an audience-led future, we've had it all here. And we're back for the remaining 2 days of the event as well. So lots more on the agenda to share. In the next session, we're going to talk, though, as you know, about IP, which is a hugely important area of focus for many people, and is, of course, already starting to replace SDI in many facilities, particularly new builds, and is also key in connecting up virtualized workflows between on-premise facilities and the cloud. So a whole emerging area to focus on, but also easy to get carried away just focusing on the technology. And what we're going to do in this session is also look at IP from the point of view of what benefits does it bring to program makers and content creation. How can production teams benefit from workflows that are joined up by IP rather than traditional methods? So taking us on this journey from SDI to IP, let's please welcome Tony Orme, who's the technology editor of the Broadcast Bridge. Tony's going to be taking us through. Please share what he's talking about on social media. You can use the hashtag BVE19 and follow the event at BV Expo. And save up your questions as well. We'll have a roving mic going around later so you can ask Tony anything you'd like. So over to you.
Thank you. I'm the technology editor for the Broadcast Bridge, and I also lecture at the University of Surrey. I teach broadcast engineering there, and one of the first lectures I give is how to derive NTSC colour subcarrier frequency from first principles, because I work on the principle that if you can understand that, you can understand anything. And it also explains why we have some strange and interesting frame rates, and just because you can do something in a piece of software doesn't mean you necessarily should. I've written 3 books. I have 2 of them with me, which are available on the Broadcast Bridge stand. We have Building IP Media Facilities. This is how to teach, predominantly how to teach broadcast engineers how to do IT. I've written another one called something similar, but it's got IT in it, which is teaching IT engineers how to do broadcast. And with the third book, sponsored by Riedel, is some deep and interesting stuff on video, audio, and control over IP. So I'll just leave those there. What I wanted to talk about was about why ST2110 is so important. And as far as I'm concerned, ST2110 is the most important advance in broadcast television we have had since John Logie Baird went head-to-head with EMI Marconi in the 1936 BBC trials in London. And I'll hopefully develop on that as I talk further, just explain exactly what I mean. Just out of interest, does anybody know when the first high-definition service was broadcast? Approximately a year. To 1936. Thank you, Peter. Because it is indeed 1936. It says so. The Greater London Council says so with their little blue plaque on the side of Alexandra Palace. Unlike sort of what we'd have to believe nowadays, where it's the 1980s and 1990s, this is the first broadcast of HD. So what problem are we trying to solve? We want a distributed, reliable, real-time, point-to-point system for broadcasting media to viewers. This is what we have now, and this is what we have to be able to keep as we move forward. This is the given. But we also want to improve our workflows and our workflow efficiencies, and preferably reduce costs. Reducing costs is an interesting idea because different costs mean so many different things to so many different people. And whether you're actually reducing hardware costs or, dare I say it, people costs, you have to look at the much bigger picture to see what we are really reducing. But I often hear interesting stories about real time and what does real time really mean? And the only decent definition I found of real time is this: the execution of data in the shortest time possible, providing near instantaneous output. Near instantaneous output. So when we started in the good old days of television with PAL and NTSC, we had delays typically of just a few fields. because the camera was intrinsically linked to the monitor through the transmission system, and there were no frame stores or delays in the way, or very few. And we were limited to the propagation through the electronics and also through the ether. But as we progressed to SDI, we increased the delays to at least 4 fields, sometimes a few more, as field synchronizers and frame synchronizers became inherent in vision switchers, vision mixers, and frame stores. And then when MPEG came along, we increased our delay even further to about a second as we got long GOPS. And IPTV also, I'm liberally using the term OTT, and radio increased delays to many seconds, usually within a minute. I was at an NAB stand, I think last year or the year before, been given a presentation by a very big company who said we've made some great advances in our delivery because we've now got our real-time live broadcast down than just under a minute. So, what are we familiar with? Traditional distribution assumes the underlying network is error-free. So our SDI networks are error-free-ish, nearly error-free, error-free enough. Latencies are easily defined and usually very, very low. And systems are predictable and static, and so relatively static. So many of us have worked in control rooms where a beautiful installation is finished, and within a few hours of it finishing, the MCR engineers have walked in there with their patch cords and repatched everything that had been beautifully designed. But they stay relatively static, and so we can predict all kinds of propagation delays and latencies. But with IP, we have distribution of IP packets, which is inherently unreliable. IP packets, distribution of IP packets, was never designed to be 100% reliable. It was designed as a best effort delivery system, but never completely reliable. Latencies are difficult to define, and they do vary. They can even vary on a packet-by-packet basis, depending on how the network is behaving. Systems self-heal and are dynamic. So the whole point of using IP is that if a particular leg breaks down within a system, the network will automatically relearn itself and route your packets via a different node. Also called spanning tree, if anybody wants to have some nightmares about having 30-second flaps where a network relearns itself. And networks have the history in banking and the military. So this is quite different to the way broadcasting works in the way people think. Now, in banking, data accuracy is incredibly important. Other than sort of micro trading, timing is relatively unimportant. You know, it doesn't matter whether it takes a second or 2 seconds for your bank statement to get across the ether onto your screen. But in broadcast television, timing is probably the most important aspect of what we do. So, the solutions. Broadcasting requires placing a synchronous network onto an asynchronous network. That's fundamentally what we're doing with IP. We're taking our synchronous broadcast television system, even if you forget about SDI, you've got frames happening 25 times a second in Europe and the UK, and 30 divided by 1.001 in the Americas, and then you have to match that frame accurately and sample accurately to your monitor, and the same sort of argument in audio. But IP is inherently asynchronous by definition, by design. We have to make the delivery task-based. We have to make the delivery task-based instead of time-based. So IP systems are all about events and getting events to work, as opposed to the time-based systems we use in broadcast television. And all recorders and players have to be time-stamped synchronous. So we have to make sure the players and the recorders are absolutely time-stamped synchronous. Otherwise, we have too much data or not enough, and we get dropouts or crackly audio. So one of the first solutions to this was the SMPTE's ST2022-6, which converted the entire video signal and embedded audio into IP packets. And that was the first sort of step into IP for many broadcasters. It respects the line and the field and the frame sinks, so all of the data that was designed in the 1930s, that is still with us today, was designed actually into that into those IP packets. Consequently, it's incredibly wasteful of bandwidth. And I've seen some estimates that 20, 25, sometimes 30% of the bandwidth of a 2022-6 signal is taken up by frame, blanking, and field sync information. And forward error correction, which consumes additional bandwidth, is required in many applications. So if you're distributing a signal outside of a well-defined network, you have to have some sort of forward error correction, which further adds to your challenges. So the beauty of ST2110 and the great, as far as I see it, the genius of ST2110 and why it's going to make life much better for production and much more interesting for engineers is that we have abstracted away the video, audio, and metadata from the underlying hardware. So no longer will we be dependent on point-to-point dedicated connections. So again, let me just reiterate that. With the old analog and SDI video signals, we had to have frame syncs, field syncs, line blanking, field blanking, frame blanking, all built into the signal, which was also there in 2022-6. Which means working these signals over IP networks is incredibly inefficient and quite difficult to do. But when we moved to 2110, it became a true packet-based technology. But in doing so, we had to take away all of the timing information. All of the syncs, the frame syncs, the line syncs, blanking, all had to be stripped away and replaced with something else. But the other beauty of 2110 is that no longer will we be constrained by fixed, non-scalable hardware systems. And this is another key win for 2110, as I see it. I was talking to a colleague earlier and said, in the old days of when we were, I say old days, like 5 years ago, when we were designing with SDI, big scalable systems, and we'd have a massive 512 square SDI matrix. If we wanted to expand it with another one, we'd put another 512 square matrix by the side of it, and then join the two together with tie lines, which A, wasted a lot of ports, and B, was incredibly inefficient and makes the scalability of the system incredibly expensive and almost impossible. But as we move to IP, that idea has gone away. Now, I hear a lot of stuff about COTS, and some of it's even true. Broadcast requires high-end commercial off-the-shelf products, hardware. When you hear people talk about COTS and you're going to be saved loads of money because you can use IT, and you have in your head, great, I can go down to PC World and buy a few computers and a switch and build myself a TV station, you can't. The kind of grade of hardware we're talking about in broadcast centers is at the high end. It's the kind of thing data centers use, so high-tier data centers. So a switch is going to cost you 80, 90, 100,000 pounds, and it's going to give you a lot more flexibility. So COTS, yes, because it's the kind of stuff you can buy in the wider IT community, but not COTS in terms of you can buy it in the sort of domestic or even possibly the industrial type IT networks. So these are enterprise-grade routers and switches, and are at the cutting edge of technology and are incredibly expensive. So they're literally at the forefront of what technology has to offer. They're expensive, and you will need support contracts to support them for several reasons. One, the number of parts that are manufactured is relatively low compared to domestic products, so spares have to be stored. And secondly, because of security. So for a manufacturer to support a high-grade switch, it needs to invest a lot of time in security and making sure nobody can find vulnerabilities within your switch. Because built into the switches is the control layers and the switching layers, which we typically didn't have in SDI or had it in a more abstract sense. But now it is technically possible for somebody to hack into a switch, and you really don't want that to happen. And the best way of stopping that is to buy into the support contracts, probably the only way. So that's another sort of myth about COTS. It's not cheap in terms of you can go to your local store and buy the hardware. It is cheap in terms of it doesn't cost as much as as much as the old SDI, but it is IT high-grade products which comes with its own support and its own people who need to be able to look after them. So the SD2110 success is all about the fact that SMPTE have abstracted away the underlying hardware from the video, audio, and metadata, allowing data center processing. So the next advantage is, as we progress, and remember this is sort of at the forefront of technology at the moment, that we are moving to data center processing of our video. I wrote a couple of articles a short while ago about how data centers using high-performance computing can now process 5G data. There was I think it was a BT application using HPE technology, and they had their latencies down to about 40 milliseconds, but their data throughput was about 2.5, 3 gigabits a second. And that's going through servers. So we are, and software-defined networks. So we are getting to the point now where we can put real-time video through these systems. And we can leverage the technological advances from the IT industries, for example, 5G. So one of the other big advantages of this story, specifically moving to 2110, is we can now ride on the back of the innovation of IT. So the amount of R&D in IT is far, far greater than it could ever be in broadcasting, just because of the economies of scale. So other advantages of our 2110, it's format agnostic. With an SDI network, you are relatively tightly constrained by the kind of formats you can transfer over that network. So, for instance, you could have HD or SD, you can have 30 1001 frame rates or 25 frames per second, but trying to mix them all together can be done, but is a bit of a challenge. With IP, it's relatively straightforward because you don't, the data, the actual network, the hardware there doesn't care about the kind of data you're transporting over it. So it is format agnostic, and you can quite happily transport audio, video, and metadata all over the same network. Different formats can be simultaneously distributed over the same network or fiber. So yes, you can have different audio, you can have different video, anything you like as long as it's data can be transported over the same IP network. Unlike in SDI, where if you wanted to transfer audio over an SDI network, you have to use embedders to put it into the VANC and then de-embedders at the other side to pull it out. And if you wanted frame-accurate data switching, you had to embed it into the SDI and de-embed it at the other end. And it became incredibly complex. It can be done, and lots of people have done it, but it's very, very difficult. With IP, that whole task becomes a lot easier. Sorry, I won't use the word easier. It becomes more achievable. The future proof of new formats yet to emerge. So one of the other great advantages of IP is that as we move forward and come up with new ideas and new things to do, we don't have to be aware of them just yet, because they will fit into the network at some point without having to consider the design. So it means release of specifications should be a lot easier, because we don't have to future-proof too much, because we can know that the underlying IP network will be able to transport the data. So as we're becoming more and more software-defined, the fast product development will be available as software as a service. So again, this is a little bit futuristic. There are some people doing software as a service for services, and there are some people doing it in real time as well. But it's a developing technology. But as we become, the hardware becomes more able to support real-time video and audio and metadata, we will be able to build software as a service and all the advantages that brings. And the cost of development and time to market for new products and services will be significantly reduced, because we don't have to build the hardware. So anybody building software, building systems, really only has to think about the application and the software they're building, not get the underlying hardware working. If anybody, any vendors in the room have ever built high-speed hardware, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But at least 6 months development time to build a piece of hardware, sometimes longer. And also new pricing models will emerge. So as we develop SaaS models, we can develop licensing. So we no longer need to buy a product off a shelf. You can buy a service off a shelf, much like you can buy an app on your phone. You can buy an app in a SaaS service. And you don't need to buy it for the whole duration of the lifetime of your business. You can just buy it as it's needed for that particular production. So if you need an encoder to do a particular transcode, you can buy it for the time that transcode is live, say 12 hours or whatever. You don't need to buy it once and then look after it for the rest of your life. And pay-as-you-go and pay-on-demand services will also become more prevalent. And as we virtualize and have more cloud services, we'll be able to, again, increase that offering. One of the most important aspects, I think, is systems will be more dynamic. So we have to get out of the idea of buying static systems, building them, and then taking them apart again at the end of a show. We can just buy services as we need them on a rental basis. And these are bits of software as well, so it's not like you have to go and install a piece of hardware. You can download the software into the system you're running, and this will be able to work much more quickly. So the barriers to entry for new innovators has been significantly reduced. Because a lot of the difficulty in building systems for television stations and broadcasting was the hardware. Now, if we take away the need to build hardware, you are then only limited by your imagination and your ability to program software. And full cloud production systems are now possible. I've seen them working, and speed with which new products and services will accelerate. So these are all the benefits of a production, because productions are constantly at the cutting edge of technology, and as new services become available, they'll be able to use them more quickly. I'm just conscious of the time, but new pricing models will become available as well. And we'll also look to telcos and IT for solutions. So one of the challenges of distributing signals, SDI signals, is when we get outside the building. Because within the building, it's a fairly fixed static environment. How do we get an SDI signal from London to Paris? We've got SDI networks and telcos will do that for us, but at a price. As we move to IP, telcos can distribute signals with much greater ease than they could do with SDI signals. So one example here is the remote integration, or outside broadcasts, as we used to call them. And what I've done here is shown how this could work, is working in some places, and will work in the future. So we have here a camera which is generating ST2110 with the necessary timestamps. And that goes into a cloud network, and then we can have all different resources around the country or even around the world processing that data. And because of the fact we're using this PTP timestamp, and each individual essence stream has its own timestamp, all referenced to the same beginning here, we can distribute all of that data in lots of different places and then bring it back together for production, and then even put it back into the system for broadcasting. So it means that if you're doing subtitles and you're doing, say, a multilingual subtitle where you've got 5 different languages, the best place to have the people doing your subtitling is in their country of origin. So you leave them there and just give them proxy feeds of the subtitles with the right timing, and then you'll be able to bring that all together in real time for production. We can also switch IP streams, so we can have a central facility of a production studio somewhere in one city, but then switch between lots of different stadiums for a match, assuming they're not on at the same time. And then just switch between lots of different stadiums, and in that way you can keep your production team in the studio and have a minimal production team out at the stadium. So instead of having massive OB facilities, you just keep your camera and sound operatives at the stadium with some support, and then the main production crew stay in the studio. And when one game's finished, you move your IP streams to the next stadium. So in conclusion, ST2110 has abstracted away the underlying hardware from the video, audio, and metadata, and that is the key win for us in video, in broadcast television. IP is bidirectional and opens up a whole new world of possibilities. One thing I didn't mention is SDI is unidirectional. You have a source and a destination. With IP, you have a source and a destination, and the signal can come back by the same route. And so you've got all kinds of interactive things you can do with that. IP provides easy connectivity to data centers and the cloud. So if you want to process video in the cloud, you can do so through an IP link, much more easy than you could do with SDI. There are no GPIs in the cloud, incidentally. And virtualization and generic networks have removed the antiquated, restrictive hardware models of the past. So, if you want to do some more reading on IP and how it will help in the future, those are just a list of some of the articles I've written. I think I've written close to 50 or 60 articles on IP for a whole genre of different things, from cameras to sound, infrastructure, and also more recently high-performance computing and storage. I've written some articles that went out a few weeks ago about how artificial intelligence is now used in storage to be able to take advantage of the different types of storage we have that will help keep costs down and provide the best and most efficient system possible. So that's me. If you've got any questions, I'll take questions now, but please take my details. If you want to contact me, you can either do so through the broadcast bridge, or you can email me or call me on one of those numbers. So, does anybody have any questions?
Just wondering, how low a latency can you get over between countries with the system, with the new IP system?
It depends on the telco and the kind of network you're using and the kind of protocol you're using. If you're using, say, 2022 in FEC, then the latency will be relatively low. If you're using OTT type of technology, then that's using HTTP, which is set on top of TCP, which is then on top of RTP, then IP, which is going to cost you a lot of time. Okay, and that could be your 30 seconds.
Yeah,
it depends on the network.
In terms of, say, I'm interested in musical performance over the internet.
Yeah.
Could we get the latency low enough that a conductor could give a downbeat and then a musician could respond to that within a reasonable amount of time?
I know there's a lot of research going on into that at the moment, and this is where CDNs are earning their money. I don't know, but that's sort of about distributing the data to the network. The challenge we have in internet, in the World Wide Web, is two things. One, there's no multicasting. There's only unicast. And secondly, there's no way of defining the speed of the network because it's open and it can take a different route. So in this, I'm really talking about networks you would buy from a telco, so a layer 2 route from London to Paris. But even that is still going to be significantly cheaper than buying an SDI route from London to Paris. I think there's another question here.
It's more or less the same as that, really. But I guess another question is how much bandwidth does, say, an HD signal with one audio channel, one stereo audio channel take, as an example?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I could probably thrash the numbers out, but it's probably be about 75% of 1.5 gigs, because that's the effectively what you're saving uncompressed, because you're stripping out all of the line syncs and field syncs. So approximately, I'd say about 75% of 1.5 gigs, which is about just over a gig, isn't it? But that's uncompressed. But you can put compressed or uncompressed. It's entirely up to you. Yeah.
Hi there. I know about NTP, and you were saying that the timing's critical once you split up the essences. Could you just explain a bit about it's PTP, is it?
Yeah, PTP, Precision Timing Protocol, is a IEEE 1588-2, I believe. And that is a timing system we've borrowed from IT. And I think it was originally developed to help synchronize robots on production lines, so that when the two robots either side of the chassis turned, one didn't stop in front of the other, so they didn't twist the chassis. And this can achieve sub-nanosecond accuracy within certain limits. You've got to be very careful about the network design. So I think Sunty chose PTP because that's the most accurate timing system which is available at the moment. It's much more accurate than NTP. So it's similar to NTP in the concept, but it's much more accurate in the way it works. Yeah. Well, you have, again, it gets a bit interesting. You have a master clock, and then, or you can have many master clocks because there's an algorithm built into the protocol which allows all the master clocks to talk to each other and decide which is the most accurate. And then the one that's the most accurate becomes the master clock and all the others listen to it. And so you get a distributed clock system which is inherently redundant, so you don't have to have multiple SPGs. But that's essentially you have to have a master clock generator, and quite often they're tied to GPS, or one of them will be tied to GPS to make it as accurate as it possibly can be. So it also means that clocks on the other side of the world are also tied to GPS, and then they can be relatively synchronized.
Slightly off the wall question, but with the speed of broadcast technology and the development speeding up,
Yeah.
do you think that the regulators are behind the curve at the moment? The regulators, are they behind the curve?
For what, designs in general, or just?
No, just things like public service broadcasters with back channels being available and all the rest of it.
A simple answer is I don't know. I don't think I answered the guess at that one. I think there are a few that I only know of 2 mainstream 2110 installations at the moment. This says specifically about 2110 as opposed to 2022-6. And I think I can certainly see the advantages why broadcasters would now want to move to this. And I know BBC Wales is building a 2110 system at the moment. So yeah, here we go. Yeah, and and I think it's going to need a few big installations to work properly before everybody else has the confidence to then jump in and make it work, because it's so different from SDI. I think it's very difficult to make it backwards compatible with 2022-6, for instance. So you suddenly bail out and think, oh, this isn't going to work, we'll do it the other way, will be quite a challenge. So I think it's yeah, I think as we see more big companies move forward, then they certainly will.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
For your questions. Come back in 15 minutes' time for the final session. We'll be looking at machine learning with Datatonic. If you want to know more about IP, then the Broadcast Bridge has a booth here. Go and pay them a visit. If you're back here tomorrow as well, check out the agenda in the TechFlow Futures Theatre. We've got a lot of more great content all day tomorrow and on Thursday. So thank you, and please join me in thanking Tony as well.